Leave the United States and country hop to find a new country. Hey everyone, my name is Alex and I'm a lead consultant with Expat Exact, an expatriate and relocation agency aiding you in finding the destination that matches your destiny. And today we're going to be talking about country hopping, which is incredibly exciting because it's the opportunity to stay in countries for consecutive months. It's not where you're a vacationer, but you're a resident of that country for a set period of time, allowing you to become more intimate with that country. This is a fantastic opportunity to screen countries, especially if you're not sure where you want to move. But also another thing is if that country does not allow you to stay, let's say for consecutive years, you still get the opportunity to stay there outside of the vacation window up until the time they say that you have to either leave and return or until you have to take another step in the process to gain legality associated with long-term residence. So let's get started with how you can make this happen with country hopping successfully. The first thing to pay attention to is how long you can stay in a country visa free or on a tourist visa. Now, for a lot of people, this is the number one reason why they love the idea of country hopping, and it's that they don't have to submit paperwork associating themselves with temporary or long term residency. However, one of the biggest cons then is how long can you actually stay? And that not only differentiates by country, but also by zone. And that's commonly overlooked because there are three zones you do want to pay attention to: the Schengen zone, you also have the CA4 zone, and you also have the East African Tourist Visa zone too. So let's take as an example the Schengen zone. You can only be in that zone for 90 days out of a 180-day period, meaning you can be in one of those countries in that zone for, let's say, 90 days, then you have to leave for 90 days, and then you can come back in. So that's why you want to be aware not only of countries, but zones. And so there are 27 in Schengen. And then for the CA4, we're talking about Central America. Specifically, we're talking about Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Guatemala. And with East African visas, we're talking about Rwanda, we're talking about Uganda, and we're also talking about Kenya as well. So with those places, you want to be mindful as well. And we're looking at a 90-day window too. Now, there are certain cases, let's say with 180 days, looking at Canada, you can be there for 180 days and then you can leave and you can come right back in. However, you do need to be aware of the fact that this leaves a lot of room for ambiguity around your residency status. So if you keep going in and out to certain countries, we use Canada as an example because we get a lot of questions about that. You could get asked at the border, well, are you actually living here? And of course, many countries don't want you staying there without the right long term residency status, i.e., you do need to file paperwork. So these are all things to keep in mind. But the most important thing is that you are aware of what limits there are. And if you're running close to the limits, you're prepared to leave, or better yet, when it's time for you to come back, you're filing the correct documentation. Once you've learned the ins and outs of being on a tourist visa or being in a country visa free, you do want to take note of the time of year that you're going. Yes, geography is important. Should I go here first, there second? All of it is a strategy, but the time of year is incredibly important because if you had to be in a place, let's say for 90 days, because that's your limit, you may want to be in that country, let's say in the spring, optimal time, or maybe in the winter. And you do want to be mindful of that peak season or is that off season for vacationers. So definitely take in mind as you're mapping things out where you want to be at what points in time in the year based off of events, vacationers, experiences that you want to have, but more importantly, what are you envisioning in terms of the optimal experience for you living in that country, even if it's only for 90 days. The next thing is costs. Not only the cost of moving, but the cost of actually being in a country. Now, when it comes to your moving costs, well, that's what you do when you start to map out your flights or your train rides ahead of time. And not just you, but everyone else are coming with you and also your bags. Start looking at, is it cheaper for me to go on a train with 4 and 5 suitcases per person, or is it better we hop on a flight? And yes, you're going to countries that are closer to one another. Perhaps it could be cheaper than you being on a long international flight. But you do want to make sure you're considering the bags because, of course, where you have bags that are over a certain weight limit, you could be paying an overage. Or if you have multiple bags that go outside of the limit, you could notice that you're incurring more in terms of the overall cost. So be very, very mindful of how much you're spending on moving. But the second cost is going to be how much it actually is once you're in the country. And because you're not on a 12-month lease, you're paying pretty much by the day for a lot of places, such as doing Verbo or Airbnb. So be aware of how much those apartment costs are, especially if you need two, three, four bedrooms because of the people coming with you. So that's where having a budget is going to be incredibly important. Because if you set a budget that you do not want to exceed for the month, you may notice that a particular country might not be eligible because of the fact that it costs so much for you to stay there short term. So definitely do that research ahead of time to figure out what the costs are going to be. Therefore, you're aware that housing is one of the leading culprits, right? So sometimes we run into terms of cost overrun in that section. This second is going to be food. If you're a person that likes to grocery shop, that's great. For a lot of the housing opportunities that you might be taking advantage of, there could be a kitchen, so you might be able to save. Or it could be a shocker of where the cost of groceries are higher than the country you're living in now or the country you came from prior to hopping. Then, of course, you also have restaurant costs as well. So keep in mind if you do like to go out a lot to eat. And the third thing is going to be transportation. This is something that we always consider because we're like, well, I know I have to do Ubers. I know I have to get onto the train. I know I have to get onto the bus. But what are those costs? Especially if you have multiple key people coming with you. Make sure that it's not ambiguous as to how much you're going to spend, especially if you're intending on going out and moving throughout a particular destination. Now, I consider this to be the cousin of costs, and this is the exchange rates as well as fees that you incur with your bank. And what that means is that you have a bank, let's say with an institution in your country, let's say the US, and then you intend on hopping from one country to the next. You could, with your bank, notice that you have fees every time you make a transaction. That is where you'll need to look at the bank that you're banking with to see if there are accounts that are advantageous for you not being in the United States. Or perhaps it might be advantageous for you to look at another type of bank that's more expat friendly, where you're going from one country to the next. That is something that you'll have to factor in advance because you already know, let's say you're going to these four countries. So you already have a look at what the exchange rates are. Yes, they are subject to change. Be aware of the differentiating fees and make sure you're taking note of what that is going to cost you because that is in addition to, of course, that exchange rate. So you went out normally for breakfast, let's say about $10, but you spent 12. And then you also need to have the fee. You could also need to write that down as an expense. Therefore, as you're considering the cost that you want to have to set aside, that is something you have factored in, or you've done what you need to do to make sure you have the right account. Therefore, you're not incurring those fees. The next topic is going to be taxes. And this is not something where, as a country hopper, you need to immediately become afraid because for a lot of countries, if you're not in that country for 6 months or for 183 days or more, they don't consider you a tax resident. Therefore, you don't pay taxes. And that is a relief for a lot of country hoppers in Europe where the tax rate does have a reputation of being higher, especially if you're making an income that's incurring those higher tax rates. So, with that being said, if you're not a tax resident, you are not obligated to pay taxes in a lot of places. However, it will differentiate based on the country, of course. So, you do need to take note of that as you're going from one country to the next. But as it pertains to your mandatory filing for the United States, if you are a US citizen, yes, you will always have to file with the IRS whether you believe it or not. And as a part of that, a lot of people still ask as a country hopper, does the FEIE apply, which is the foreign earned income exemption? And yes, it could if you are outside of the United States for 330 days or more. And if you're saying you are out of the country and you're still working, now the time it takes for you to travel from one location to the next doesn't count. But if you meet that bona fide residency test, yes, it could be where you are in a situation where you're eligible for FEIE. But it always depends on your specific tax circumstances. So with that being said, don't count out FEIE or count it in. But it is something you still may be able to take advantage of for $126,500 of your income. Another thing to consider is how you're going to make that money and realizing that you're in a country with no visa or you're on a tourist visa. So a lot of time you will not be able to work. And if you're not able to work, you do not need to have enough savings or need to have a way of having income coming in, which can come from a pension. If you're retired, it could come from you working remotely for a country. It could come in via you working for yourself. That is something that you are going to want to take very good care of because you're not submitting paperwork where there's any accountability model with the country's legality system, making sure you have what you need. That falls back on you because you're in the country again with no visa or you're on a tourist visa. So you are 100% liable for making sure you can take care of yourself as well as any other individual who's coming alongside. The next thing is going to be service provider mapping. And so this is a commonly overlooked area, but you do want to think about all of the service providers that you use back home. By the time you hop from one country to the next, you could be due for a cleaning. You could be due to get your nails done. It could be time to get some blood drawn to make sure everything is all right. You do want to find not only the service providers, but you do want to make sure you understand if they speak your language, such as English. And you want to be aware if there are any affiliated costs, especially when it comes to health. If you're not a citizen of that country, or if you're not a long term resident because you're country hopping, you do want to be aware of the out of pocket obligations that you would have to spend. This is something where, yes, you're thinking about medical here, but even if you do go to the doctor before you leave, you never know if there's going to be an emergency. So it would be great if you could have that already mapped out prior to you being in that respective country. The last thing is with packing. Of course, this is exciting, but it's not unheard of that we bring too much or we don't consider what we actually need. So please consider these five categories. Number one is with documentation and having everything in a digital format as well as a printed copy. Of course, as expected, a passport, but also making sure you have copies of your driver's license, your international driver's license, your birth certificate, social security card, medical records, everything related to you. If in the instance you lose these things, especially in their actual format, original copy is where we're talking about, of course, if there's an emergency. Number two is going to be prescriptions. Yes, a lot of people do get refills up front, but let's say that medicine bag now has to be checked and that bag is lost. If you did have a copy of your prescription in a paper format or in a digital format, it could expedite the time it takes for you to get access to your medicine in that new country. Number three is going to be personal security. Emphasis on personal because it's how you feel optimally safe in a country. Having an air tag, putting that in your bag to track where your things are, getting locks as well, putting that on your bag. Another thing is if with permission, Airbnb says you can put chimes on doors or windows, especially if they don't have a security system. The same thing applies for a small camera system as well. This is personal security. Even if it's not a cultural norm, it's with how you will feel safe in that respective country. The fourth thing is going to be related to in country specifics. The first thing is getting cash and understanding exchange rates. Is it better to get that cash prior to leaving your previous country or getting it in your home country, or is it better to get the cash once you land? It's also making sure you have the appropriate clothing already set aside. Is it rainy time of the year? Is it colder? Making sure you have that packed and then also making sure you have enough in wall converters. This is something commonly overlooked because when you are vacationing, you may need only one for your phone or maybe with a razor or a iron. But because you're actually going to be there for several months, you may have more to plug in. So getting multiples of these adapters could be great too. Now, the last thing, the fifth, is where you're bringing your personal items, your toiletries, your clothing, your shoes. This is very close to what you'd normally bring on vacation, but definitely bring everything that you need. So even if you're not normally having to do your hair or do your nails because you've done it before, you're going to be out of the country for consecutive months. So please make sure you're packing everything you need. And one good way of doing it is doing an audit room by room. Going to the bathroom, seeing what you need, going into your closet, doing the same thing. The same thing even with the kitchen. In the kitchen, there could be something that you absolutely have to have when you're in this new country or the new countries if you're going to several, which of course is common for hopping. So take the time to audit to make sure you're not missing anything, because you don't want to run into a situation of where someone has to send that to you, or if it's that crucial, you actually have to go back. That was country hopping 101, which is only step one of the process. Step two is identifying that you actually want to country hop, either for leisure, to experience consecutive countries, or perhaps you're interested in looking at long term residency in a country. But because you haven't experienced it yet, you want to country hop to find the country to do that in. Either of these two things are perfect for expat exact consultations, where we'll learn about you as well as the accompanying individuals, all of your goals, as well as the details to where you are now, as well as what you're looking to do. All you have to do is go to expatexact.com and schedule a consultation today.